So, it's now been about a week since Dragon Age the Veilguard came out, and I feel like we need to have a little bit of a heart-to-heart about this game and about, well, the future of Bioware, I would say. Now, as I sometimes do, this video is going to be entirely unscripted, so I apologize beforehand if I seem a little word salady, in which case I will blame the language barrier. First of all, I want to talk about how I personally feel about Veilguard. Some of you guys might have seen my review already, maybe you haven't. In any case, just to essentially boil it down for you, I like Veilguard. I don't hate Veilguard. For some reason, I've seen comments where people are telling me that I'm being an asshole for simply criticizing the game, and I don't feel like I was too harsh on it in my review. I brought up things that I actually like a lot, some things that I don't like a lot, which we will get into in this video as well. But overall, I don't agree with either extreme narrative that this is a garbage game or that it's the game of the year. I just, I'm kind of in the middle here, and I feel like a lot of other creators are feeling the same way, a lot of players even. So if you haven't seen my review on it, essentially what I said is that I enjoy some things like the gameplay, for example. The combat is really, really good, even if it does get pretty repetitive after a while. I enjoy some of the characters. I enjoy Lucanus, I like Harding, and I actually think that Davrin is pretty cool as well. Again, that's some of the characters. I'm not completely loving all of them, but those three I can definitely say that I like. Also, the main story is pretty alright. I think it's a pretty tight experience when you're just playing through the main story, and I like the mystery, I like the lore that gets expanded on with the elves and just how Thedas was created and stuff like that, because the game does delve into aspects of that. And now, I didn't think I would ever say this, but my favorite aspect of Veilguard is, well, it's just soulless, I never really liked him when I played through Inquisition the first few times, but the guy has grown on me, and I definitely think that he is probably the high point in terms of characters for this game. I'm always looking forward to talk to him whenever, there's these down times through the game when you're not engaging with him, but when you do, I absolutely think that those are some of the best scenes in the game, some of the best dialogue scenes for sure. Speaking of which, let's repeat some of the things that I talked about in my review, and that is that I think the writing is pretty weak, especially in terms of dialogue, not in terms of the main story, I would say. Yes, some aspects are pretty generic, sort of with the bad guys, the villains, the gods that you're supposed to fight, but I don't think it's necessarily bad, and I think that's kind of what I mixed up in my review, is that the dialogue itself, it's very hit and miss. It doesn't mean that all of the dialogue is garbage all the time. Like I said, when you're talking to Solus, it's really good most of the time, but a lot of the other dialogue with other team members and just NPCs in general and other characters in the game, yeah, it doesn't really have that Bioware depth from the golden days, let's just say. At least that's how I feel. Also, there's the issue of the art style and the tone, which is a subject that's been hammered to death at this point. I think most of us could agree that this was not what a lot of Dragon Age fans were expecting from the next Dragon Age game. But we saw this with the first reveal trailer. It is what it is. What can you do at this point? The game is out, and we're gonna have to be satisfied with the fact that the game has a certain Pixar-ish art style that a lot of people keep repeating. And I kind of agree. So to really make it clear, the game has some really good high points where it really soars, but then it also has a tendency to fall flat on its face, and that's why Veilguard is a very mixed bag for me. I like the game a lot, and when it's really good, but when it's bad, it's pretty bad. Now, I want to talk a little bit about some other things here related to Veilguard, and that's specifically about Bioware. Now, for the past few days that after Veilguard released, I've been looking at the Steam charts just to see how many players have been playing this game. And I gotta say, it's making me feel a little bit worried. I'm not gonna lie. So if we pop on over to SteamDB, we can see that the all-time peak on Steam at least was 89,418 players at one time, which was 3 days ago as of making this video. Now that might sound impressive, and a lot of outlets seem to make the case that it is impressive, as this is the biggest Bioware launch or EA launch to date on Steam. But over 89,000 people played the game at one point. And now some of you may be a little bit upset with me bringing this up, but I think it's a good comparison either way, because last year, you guys might remember that a small little game released called Baldur's Gate 3, which saw a peak player count of 875,343 players at one point. Now, mind you, that was a while after it had been released, approximately a week after release, but on release day, Baldur's Gate 3 reached a player count of 472,136. And as of speaking right now, the 24-hour peak for Baldur's Gate 3 was 71,707 players. Now, why I'm a little bit worried about this is because if we look back at the 24-hour peak for Veilguard, it's now at 58,644 players, which means that if you compare the two RPGs, and you would think that these two games have pretty much the same audience, it just looks a little odd that Veilguard has less players the last 24 hours than Baldur's Gate 3 had, and they didn't even reach 1/4 of the amount of players on release day. Now, saying that, it's very possible that Veilguard will have a resurgence where they'll get a lot more players the coming days or maybe the coming week, because as I said, it took a week approximately for BG3 to reach those high player numbers. But then again, just the amount of players just seems tiny in comparison. However, we gotta take into consideration that BG3 released on PC first and then on consoles, so that might also be a reason for the high amount of players compared to Veilguard, which released on all platforms at the same time. That means PC, PlayStation, Xbox, yada yada. And then it also launched on the EA app, so if you purchased the game there, that might explain the lower player count on Steam as well. Now, I want to bring this up together with the reviews that have come out since the release of Veilguard, because a lot of reviews are essentially echoing what I brought up in my own review, what other creators on YouTube have brought up in their own reviews, and we can already see that the Metascore for Veilguard has dropped a little bit on Metacritic. It's also been dropping on OpenCritic, but in an interesting turn of events, it seems like the Steam reviews have picked up a bit, because I know that the Steam reviews were pretty much mixed back on release, but they're mostly positive at this point. And there's a lot of people talking about how they feel about the game. A lot of positive reviews are coming out. Still, the game isn't overwhelmingly positive. Still, it looks like people are enjoying it for what it is, which is a good thing. I'm glad you are enjoying it if you are. You know, all these reviews, they're all subjective. Just because I feel a certain way, that doesn't mean that you have to agree with it. It's just entirely subjective. If you guys listen to me, that just means that you generally probably feel the same way that I do about certain things. Or maybe you just want to support me, in which case, thank you so much for doing that. And maybe you disagree with me still, which is fine. But I want to talk about this nonetheless, because this game has been in development for many years now, let's say. We know that the history of Veilguard has been pretty complicated. There's been a lot of employee turnover, meaning that there has been lots of devs that have been involved in this project that have left throughout the project, and it's been heavily reported on from all pages of the internet. So it's no secret that this has been a complicated process for Bioware developing Veilguard. And I can't imagine that this game has been that cheap to produce, not only because it's been a while since Bioware actually made a game that made a lot of money. Yes, we had Mass Effect Legendary Edition, but then again, that was a remaster, and while it sold pretty well, I'm not sure how well that translates into actual profit for EA and Bioware. But looking at this from like a bird's eye perspective, it does look a little bit unimpressive in terms of player numbers, at least on Steam. And I'm really wondering if this game will be able to ensure that Bioware will be able to make the next Mass Effect in the future. Because I would imagine that Mass Effect still has a couple of years left before that's ready to ship. Hell, even recently, Jeff Grubb from Giant Bomb reported that, according to his sources, that Mass Effect won't be out until like 2028, 2029, or maybe even later. And speaking of which, Veilguard will not have any DLC either, which has also been confirmed and reported on, as they're gonna shift focus over to Mass Effect, which makes me super happy. I'm really glad that they're doing that. But on the other hand, I'm wondering, will these sales be enough to keep the train chugging along, so to speak? Now, these player numbers that I've talked about doesn't necessarily represent what the final actual profits will be, but it does give an idea that the amount of players have not been as much as I personally myself expected it to be. I expected it to at least reach over maybe 150,000 players on Steam at least. So I'm personally pretty surprised by this. Then again, it came out as multi-platform on release, so maybe it's not that big of a deal at all. And even if it turns out that the profits are not going to be enough, I do wonder if EA still just won't push Mass Effect to come out still, because let's face it, Mass Effect is a pretty iconic franchise, and I think Mass Effect Legendary Edition proved that people were still very interested in returning to the Milky Way galaxy in Mass Effect again and to give it another shot. So I'm still hopeful that they can pull it off, and at the end of the day, no matter what happens, I really hope that EA tries at least to make sure that Mass Effect is a thing, because as someone who considers the Mass Effect franchise to be perhaps the greatest franchise ever, I sincerely hope that they can make this work. Again, that brings us back to Veilguard. I like the game, don't get me wrong, I just don't love it. And at the end of the day, I think Veilguard proved to me at least that Bioware can still make capable games. Anyway, I just kind of wanted to have this little bit of a heart-to-heart with you guys, where I can speak openly about what I think about this whole thing and what's been going on. But as always, I'm very curious as to what you guys feel about the entire situation. What do you think about Veilguard so far? Are you done with it? Let me know in the comments below, and thank you to all my wonderful members for supporting the channel. You guys are amazing as always. This has been Mr. Holton. I should go.